I was a sophomore in high school when I first encountered the power of a photograph to cause people to leap to judgment. It was my second year on the Maine East wrestling team. For those of you who don't know that I wrestled, I'll give you a moment to shake the image of your rabbi in a singlet. Of course, my weight class was 135, so I definitely would not fit in that singlet anymore. I was a decent wrestler, as I was in most sports, good enough to compete, but never great enough to really shine. But there was this guy on our team that same year. His name was Arturo Sanchez. He was an artist on the mat. My grades were probably better in biology, but Arturo had what Howard Gardner called kinesthetic intelligence. His body intuitively understood torque, thrust, leverage, acceleration, balance. With long arms, a forehead, he somehow managed to use like a third limb, thrusting and blocking, and God-given quickness. Arturo was easily the best wrestler on our team. I found an old Chicago Tribune article detailing the Niles North Invitational from 1992. It reads, Maine East placed 6 wrestlers in the finals, yet Arturo Sanchez was its only champion at 130 pounds. Maine East held off the host school to win the title 170.5 points to 161. The title was the first of the season for Maine East. Its best previous finish was 3rd place in the Barrington Invitational. In case you were wondering, I was not among those 6 finalists. Arturo won conference, regionals and sectionals were coming up, and there was a good chance that he would qualify for the state championships. But then a photograph surfaced. It was a Polaroid found during a locker search of another student, something that was done fairly regularly in the early 90s at Maine East, where administrators and some parents were panicked about the possibility of gang violence. Ours was a diverse school, racially and otherwise, and it was generally a good school, but paranoia in those days was driving policy. Hats and jackets were banned during my time there, which led to a big student protest, and lockers were periodically searched for drugs or signs of illicit or gang activity. The Polaroid in question had been taken months earlier and featured Arturo and a couple friends hanging out. They weren't doing drugs or anything illegal, but Arturo, it seems, was flashing a gang sign. Arturo was immediately suspended, which also meant he was banned from wrestling for the rest of the season. A number of us wrestlers, along with our coach, marched to the principal's office to plead Arturo's case. An old photograph didn't mean anything, we said. Arturo had no criminal record. We all felt confident he was not in a gang. He was a good kid, goofing around with friends. But it didn't matter. The school had a zero-tolerance policy with regard to gangs. Arturo went on to be one of the best wrestlers Maine East has ever had. He never made it to state, but just missed qualifying 3 times. His senior year, he beat a couple of state placers, including the state champion. I'm pretty sure he remains the only 4-time all-conference wrestler in the history of the school. Did that suspension affect his chances? We'll never know. If he wasn't Latino, would he still have been suspended? Hard to know that for certain either. What felt certain, though, then and now, was that an injustice was done. I thought of that old photograph of Arturo in considering the miscarriage of justice that sent Kilmar Abrego Garcia to Salvadoran prison in violation of a court order. This week, the president shared a doctored photo of his tattoos to reinforce the spurious claim that he is an MS-13 gang member. The photo is real. He does have tattoos, but those tattoos, those particular tattoos that said MS-13, those were fake. Nevertheless, plenty leapt to judgment. As we know, this administration is not interested in following the facts and the law. The only court that matters to them is the court of public opinion, and even that doesn't seem to matter all that much anymore. Pray for the welfare of the government, says Rabbi Hanina Sagan HaKohanim, the vice high priest, for were it not for fear of it, each person would swallow his neighbor alive. We quote Rabbi Hanina to say government is better than anarchy, and that's probably true, but let's also not forget that he is purported to have been martyred by the Roman authorities. Sometimes governments themselves swallow people alive. Back in high school, I watched a good kid, an immigrant, get punished for no good reason. Today, the world watches as America's leaders turn their backs to the tired, to the poor, to the huddled masses. Teva spoke beautifully about the importance of comforting mourners, but I'm curious about the event that led Aaron to remain silent, the death of his sons Nadav and Avihu. When people are punished, our tendency is to wonder why. And to a certain extent, this makes sense. In a just society, one hopes that the vast majority of the time that people are punished, it's because they deserve it. But the reality is that long before Stephen Miller had his way with our immigration system, plenty of people suffered too often, too much, and without good reason. The story of Nadav and Avihu is a perfect story to discuss the fair and consistent application of justice, not because it's clear if or why they deserve what happens to them, but because it's not. It's manifestly unclear. The book of Job, by contrast, lays out a deeply troubling scenario: a righteous man who suffers without cause, on a dare, on a bet. Job's friends, they try to justify his suffering. There must have been a reason, but we, the readers, we know better. We know his pain, his loss is unjust. Job is ultimately about how to live in a capricious world with an inscrutable God. But Nadav and Avihu offer a different exploration of theodicy, of the problem of evil. Fundamentally, our Parsha isn't about why bad things happen to good people. It deals with what is, in some ways, I think, a more relevant question. When someone suffers, why is it so hard to find consensus about why they're suffering? In other words, this is a story about bias. Now, Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. V'yakrivu lifnei Hashem eish zara asher lo tziva otam. And they offered before God alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them, and fire came forth from God and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of Hashem. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what God meant by saying, 'Through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent. Before we determine what Nadav and Avihu did wrong, we need to consider, did they do anything wrong? After all, Moshe's assessment is that they died not as punishment, but al kiddush Hashem, because they were near to God. Maybe this eish zara, this strange fire, was just too much for this world. So Nadav and Avihu merited olam haba. The first century philosopher Philo of Alexandria suggests as much when he writes, having discarded all fear and hesitation, they had duly consecrated the fervent and fiery zeal which is akin to God, not going up to the altar by the regular steps, for that was forbidden by law, but proceeding rapidly onwards with a favorable gale and being conducted up even to the threshold of heaven, becoming dissolved into ethereal beams like a whole burnt offering. Nadav and Avihu are the sacrifice, he says. They simply transcended the physical plane. They might have even been holier than Moshe Rabbeinu, says Or HaChaim. The Talmud in Masechet Zvachim suggests that the comment about the Mishkan, the tabernacle from Exodus 29, which is to be sanctified by my glory, bichvodi, should be read bimechubadi, through my honored ones. Midrash Rabbah has Moshe proclaiming Aharon, or to Aharon, to Aaron, now I see that these, your sons who have died, are greater than you and me. Not Moshe's best pastoral moment, to be sure, but are they guilty of some infraction? Maybe not. Or maybe they are punished here for gazing intently at God, but not in this moment, in an earlier moment at the revelation at Sinai, when they're called up to the mountain with the 70 elders, and they gaze, they glimpse perhaps even God's being, and they're spared. But God just didn't want to ruin that moment, and so the punishment was delayed. Or perhaps their intention was good, but the execution poor, as the Netziv, the 19th century head of the Volozhin Yeshiva, explains, "Shenichnasu me'esh hitlahavut shel ahavat Hashem." They entered with the fire of inspiration from their love of God. The Torah says that love of God is precious in God's eyes, but not when that love is expressed in a way that God didn't command. Maybe this is not a punishment per se, but just a natural result of getting too close to the overwhelming force of God's presence. Like when King David in our Haftorah was moving the Ark of the Covenant and the oxen stumbled and Uzzah, well-intentioned, reached out to steady it. You remember what happened. Uzzah dies instantly. If you grab hold of a power line, you're probably going to get shocked or worse. That doesn't mean you deserve it or that the power line had it in for you. It's just the nature of power lines. Other texts speculate that in fact Nadav and Avihu did sin. Maybe they didn't follow protocol. They were supposed to wash their hands and their feet that they don't die. They were meant to wear linen breeches to cover their nakedness. Maybe they neglected one or both of these. The most famous explanation is brought by Rashi. Rabbi Yishmael said they died because they entered the Mishkan when they were drunk. And the proof of that is right after their death, God warns the remaining Kohanim not to go into the Mishkan when drunk. Let's hope they were warned the first time. And all of this is even before we get into Aaron's silence and what that might mean. The point, my friends, is that the deaths of Nadav and Avihu are shrouded in mystery. Did they sin? If so, what did they do? Did they deserve their punishment? Was a punishment at all? How we view ritual, charismatic leadership, tradition versus innovation, martyrdom, God's role in history, all these factors and more inform our view of these verses in our Parsha. The picture isn't clear. If the Torah were clearer, the tradition's assessment of it would be clearer. Instead, the story of Nadav and Avihu is a Rorschach test of our bias. Great stories help us grapple with moral complexity so we can greet life's challenges with moral clarity. Stephen Miller views immigrants themselves as an Eish Zara, alien fire. Certainly the illegal ones and probably anyone he feels doesn't deserve to live here. What a small, what a petty way to look at people. It's that kind of thinking that keeps the best athletes off the mat because they pose for a picture, because they're Mexican immigrants. I don't know why Nadav and Avihu died. Different years, I have a different take on the whole thing. Different years, I'm different when I read this story. That's the beauty of Torah. We learn it again and again only to discover new truths. But I am clear that this government, our government, is violating the law and human rights and basic human dignity. And for these sins and many others, there must be an accounting. Because the lives of real human beings are not a thought experiment. They're not a story. They're not pictures, photoshopped or otherwise. They are the lives of real human beings. And they, and we, deserve better. Shabbat Shalom.